One of the most beautiful concepts in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the idea of priesthood and what it means. One of the things that's always made our church a little bit unique is that we've never really been a church where a person just went and listened to a sermon and then put $5 in the collection plate and walked out. We've always had this kind of rambunctious, sometimes non-professional clergy that serves and blesses and helps them. When you go to a meeting at our church, you don't necessarily hear a professional sermon. You hear somebody that's doing the best that they can to preach the gospel, but the sincerity that comes through really is powerful in its own way, maybe as powerful as if there was a professional preacher up there. Well, there's a few sections of the Doctrine and Covenants that we need to read in order to fully understand the concept of priesthood and what it means. President Dieter F. Uchtdorf taught that the sections we most need to read to understand are Section 13, Section 20, Section 84, Section 107, and Section 121. He called these sections the owner's manual to the holy priesthood of God, and it's important that all members of the church, both men and women, are familiar with these concepts. So let's talk a little bit about Section 84 and how Section 84 came into being. Section 84 was given at a time when Joseph Smith was kind of struggling. He went through a difficult trial, even lost a child, when a mob attacked the John Johnson home where he was staying in March of 1832. Joseph was badly beaten and tarred and feathered. So was his partner, Sidney Rigdon, and Sidney wasn't able to function very well for a couple weeks after that. Well, without very long to rest and recover, Joseph and Sidney were also called to travel to meet with the church leaders in Missouri during this time. And this trip was also long and arduous. On the way home, they had an accident. Newell K. Whitney, one of Joseph Smith's close friends, broke his leg, and Joseph had to stay with him in Greenville, Indiana for a couple weeks under some less than pleasant circumstances. We think that while he was in Greenville, Indiana, while he may have had a little bit of spare time, Joseph Smith was inspired to write down for the first time the first vision. This account of the first vision, which was written in 1832, ties closely to Section 84 of the Doctrine and Covenants, because Joseph Smith not only talks about the first vision, but he talks about the heavenly visitors that had come to him at that point. And he breaks down what they had done into two areas. He said that these visitors gave him two kinds of authority: the ministering of angels, which sounds really close to what Section 13 says about the Aaronic priesthood, and the high priesthood after the holy order of the Son of the living God, which gave him power and ordinance from on high to preach the gospel in the administration and demonstration of the Spirit. That second one sounds a lot like things that the Lord says later about the Melchizedek priesthood. So let's take a minute to talk a little bit about how we define priesthood in the church. One way to define priesthood is to draw what's called a line of authority. For instance, if I were to put my line of authority up on the screen, I would say that I was ordained by my father. My father was ordained by a nice man named Merlin Christensen, who was ordained by a guy named Joseph Fielding Smith. Joseph Fielding Smith was ordained by his father, Joseph F. Smith, who was ordained by Brigham Young. Brigham Young was one of the original 12 apostles of this dispensation, and he was ordained by the three witnesses, at least one of whom, Oliver Cowdery, had been ordained by Peter, James, and John, who were in turn ordained by Jesus Christ. So you can see here several degrees of separation that connect me back to Jesus Christ directly and say that my authority comes from him. In the church, we don't think that priesthood authority comes from just being a nice person or going to school or having a willingness or desire to serve other people. It has to come through a line of authority. And part of the reason why we believe this is that a line of authority for the priesthood is also given in Section 84 of the Doctrine and Covenants. It talks about some very significant priesthood holders, among them Moses and Aaron, but also Melchizedek and Abraham, and then explains who gave them the priesthood. And there's a few surprises here. For instance, did you know that Moses wasn't ordained by a member of the house of Israel? Moses, according to Section 84, was ordained by his father-in-law, Jethro, who was a Midianite. Jethro was still a descendant of Abraham, but through one of his other children that he had with his later wife, Keturah. So that means that the Lord must have been working with multiple groups of people, not just Israel, because Jethro was a worthy and able priesthood holder. This section also reveals that John the Baptist was ordained, not to the priesthood, but ordained to overthrow the kingdom of the Jews when he was just 8 days old. And he was given these blessings when he was very young. And eventually, Section 84 traces the lineage of the priesthood all the way back to Abraham, who received the priesthood from Melchizedek, who received the priesthood from the lineage of his fathers, even till Noah, then from Enoch, and all the way down to Adam. The Lord then says, this priesthood continues in the church of God in all generations without beginning of days or end of years. Now, in explaining this too, the Lord also explains that there is a priesthood that was given to Aaron and that was given to him and his family. And that brings up one of the trickiest ideas about priesthood. If you read through the scriptures, you could sometimes get the idea that priesthood is like a royal family, that it passes from parents to children and so on and so on. Now, if you're not part of the royal family or you come from a family that's not that great, can you still hold the priesthood? Well, the most important section of section 84 answers this question. It's called the Oath and Covenant of the Priesthood. It's common for the Oath and Covenant priesthood to be read by someone like a bishop or a branch president with someone that's about to receive the priesthood. And one of the promises it makes is this. In verse 33, it says, "Whoso is faithful unto the obtaining of these two priesthoods of which I have spoken, and the magnifying their calling, are sanctified by the Spirit unto the renewing of their bodies. They become the sons of Moses and of Aaron and the seed of Abraham and the church and kingdom and the elect of God." So maybe you're someone like Alma the Younger, who had a really good family that took care of you and sort of dragged you back into the church. You get the priesthood. Maybe you're like Abraham and you come from a family that's really not that great. Hopefully your dad doesn't try to sacrifice you, but Abraham's dad did. Doesn't matter. Abraham proved himself worthy and was adopted into the priesthood because of his righteousness. And all those, regardless of whether or not they come from good families or bad families, become part of this royal family, becoming sons of Moses and Aaron. Now, what does the Lord expect of those that receive the priesthood? And how do we magnify our calling so that we can be sanctified by the Spirit? President Thomas S. Monson was really fond of just saying, what does it mean to magnify a calling? It means to build it up in dignity and importance, to make it honorable and commendable in the eyes of all men, to enlarge and strengthen it, and to let the light of heaven shine through it to the view of other men. And how does one magnify a calling? Simply by performing the service that pertains to it. You don't have to be spectacular. You just have to do your job and be there when the Lord needs you to be there. If you do those things, you're magnifying your calling, and you're finding the blessings of the priesthood already flowing into your life. Now, the Lord further explains that part of the blessings that come from the oath and covenant of the priesthood come from us receiving the priesthood. And there's a couple different ways we can look at receiving the priesthood as well. The most basic sense, and the way Section 84 is talking about it, is that a person qualifies for, is found worthy, and is ordained to the Aaronic and Melchizedek priesthoods. But receiving the priesthood could also mean that we accept the counsel and direction, that we receive those that have been given priesthood stewardship over us, whether that's a stake president, a bishop, a branch president, a ministering brother. All those people have been assigned to watch after us. We don't have to follow them if they're not living the gospel, but when we receive them, even though they're imperfect and they're struggling, we receive blessings as well. In a last sense, to receive the priesthood could just mean that you receive authority in order to bless and help others. In fact, a few years ago, President Dallin H. Oaks brought this up in a general conference and gave an interesting insight. President Oaks said, "We're not accustomed to speaking of women having the authority of the priesthood in their church callings. But what other authority can it be? When a woman, young or old, is set apart to preach the gospel as a full-time missionary, she's given priesthood authority to perform a priesthood function." Now pay close attention to the way President Oaks uses the language here. He says priesthood keys are what give a person priesthood authority. Right now, only certain offices of the priesthood, people that are presidents, hold priesthood keys. But priesthood authority is the authority to function within the church. President Oaks went on to say, the same is true when a woman is set apart to function as an officer or teacher in a church organization under the direction of one who holds the keys of the priesthood. Whoever functions in an office or calling received from one who holds priesthood keys exercises priesthood authority in performing her or his assigned duties. So does a Relief Society president, Young Women's president, or ministering sister also have priesthood authority? Yeah, there's no other kind of authority in the church. But it's important that we maybe remember the difference between those who hold priesthood keys and those who hold priesthood offices and those who hold priesthood authority, because they've all been asked to bless and help us. Now, interestingly, this section opens with a command reiterated for them to build a temple in Zion. And temples tie back to the priesthood as well. In temples, men and women receive the blessings of the priesthood and are given authority as they make sacred covenants. Even the new and everlasting covenant of marriage is referred to in one place by Joseph Smith as an order of the priesthood. And all of these authorities are meant to allow us to continue up the ladder, becoming like Jesus Christ. Because the Lord says that if a person receives the priesthood, then they receive him. And if they receive him, Jesus Christ, then they receive the Father. And if they receive the Father, then they receive all that the Father has. The basic idea behind priesthood is that God gives us a little bit of his power and his authority, and we use it to bless others. As we demonstrate our capability and our trust and our gifts, the Lord gives us more and more power until that great and blessed day when we can finally become like him and have all power to bless all people and be a force for good in the universe.